You hear that, boys?
The
Size don't matter. Welcome to Be Frank. I am Frank, and this is To Be Frank After Dark, Adult Swim only today. We've got Fallon Fields, who's our director at District Counseling of Cyprus. She also serves clients in the Katy area, and Fallon is currently pursuing a specialty in sex therapy. And so we're going to be talking about that. And so, welcome, Fallon.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. I'm super excited.
Fallon, so like, what is sex therapy?
Okay, sex therapy basically is regular therapy where we focus on sexual issues or sexual topics, and that can range from various degrees or like topics,
Okay.
right? So whether that's from sexual trauma, whether that's talking about relationships, intimacy issues, sexual dysfunctions, anything like that, we focus on. And I try to make sure with my clients that we're focusing not
Mm-hmm.
just on any anxiety or performance issues that might be going on, but also holistically with the body, biology, and anything that could present an issue to a healthy and wonderful sex
Oh,
life.
wow. So, I mean, it covers a lot of areas.
Yes.
What made you want to go into sex therapy?
So there's two answers. So my first answer is I was working with a lot of clients, especially when I used to work at an agency who were struggling with sexual trauma. And I
Mm-hmm.
felt that I didn't have the skills to really help them the way that I
Mm.
would have liked. Like, I knew to be empathetic, I had some knowledge of sexual trauma and just working with people overall who are struggling with trauma, but
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really understand the impact of sexual trauma. And so I wanted to branch out and get a better understanding of how to help clients who were going through that.
Mm.
Now, the other answer is I also just love sex.
Yeah. All right. Okay.
Like, I know that sounds like a crazy thing, but like,
Mm-hmm.
no, hear me out, hear me out. Yeah, I love sex. It's something that is fun, it's curious,
Yeah.
it's, again, pleasurable, but more so for me on an
Yeah.
intellectual level. There's so many things that go
Mm.
into having good consensual sex. And a lot of people are not educated on that, including myself. So, like, starting out, when I think about myself when I was younger and not really having, although my parents did a lot of sex talk with me, not really having a solid education around it.
Mm-hmm.
And then as I started talking to my peers and growing older and unfortunately being a kid with unlimited access to the internet because the internet was just
Yeah.
coming out, a lot of my information was from my peers, from the
Mm.
internet. And so that kind of really changed the view of how I thought sex was or
Mm-hmm.
how it was supposed to go
Mm-hmm.
because of the things that I was just absorbing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as a sex therapist, I want to be like also educating kids as a part of sex therapy too. And so, making sure that kids, adults, everyone understands that, like, there's a lot of nuances that come to sex and what
Mm-hmm.
good sex should look like and what it should feel like.
When you say kids, right?
Mhm.
What does that look like? Is it like educating them, or
Yeah.
even in
So
yeah?
mostly I do a lot of psychoeducation
Mm-hmm.
on sex.
Yeah.
I also make sure to involve the parents. I feel like that is such an
Nice.
important thing and a moment that I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
take from them either because at the end of the day, they should feel involved.
Right.
And so normally when I work with kids, I talk to the parents and I ask them, like, hey, are you
Yeah.
comfortable with maybe sitting in or me having that conversation with your child?
Right.
And I haven't had a parent tell me, like, no, don't do that, meh, 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 which thank God. But I've had a lot of parents want to sit in, and I'm always like, yeah, absolutely. Sit in, jump in into the
Mm-hmm.
conversation because this is something important. And I also want
Yeah.
your kids to know that you're a safe person to talk about sex.
Mm.
And I go over what terms I'm going to be using, how this works. And so it turns into not just an education for that child, but for the parent and the family as well
That's
if they
great.
choose to sit in.
What are some of the common challenges and concerns, that clients may bring in sex therapy, or even some of the cases that you've seen so far?
So, some of the cases that I've seen have been a lot of like sexual trauma and then
Mm-hmm.
intimacy issues, whether that is people having different sex drives, again, whether they have been sexually assaulted, whether as a child or recently as an adult or teenager. And again, that looks very different when it's a kid telling me these things, because that's a whole other different can of worms, versus an adult who went through that. So, a lot of times, when talking to adults and kids too, but specifically focusing on adults, it's confronting the shame part of it, because there is a lot of shame, especially depending on how you survive that traumatic moment, right? So a lot of times what we see in media is, with sexual assault, someone's fighting back, right? You're running away. And so some victims who don't do that, right? There's nothing to run away. Maybe you freeze, right? Your body is there, but your mind is somewhere else, or you're going to say or do whatever it takes to escape that moment. And a lot of times there's a lot of shame, more shame than if you fought your way out of it. And so helping clients recognize that no matter what their body chose to do, that it is okay, that you were able to survive that moment, and that moment made you, although it's really hard, how can we get back into the body? How can we redefine healthy sex where you're in a position of power and control, where it is consensual and not that moment of fear? But that also translates into sometimes having a partner, right? And not being able to be intimate in the way that you are, because sex has changed for you due to that traumatic moment. And some people, even without that, can just struggle, if you are religious, and there's been a lot of shame centered around sex or a lack of education. Even if we take that away, right, there can be a lot of shame and blame and confusion when engaging in sex and how to act and respond to sex, especially if all you've gotten is things from media about how you should respond or how you should act or what it should look like in those moments.
What are some contributing like factors to that shame that you're talking about? Like, what is it? Are we like, you mentioned religious, I mean culture. I'm assuming is
Yeah.
what comes to mind. But what might be some things that could contribute to that shame?
So, shame is made, I tell all my clients, shame is made out of three different parts, right? Which is secrecy, isolation, and judgment, right? So, if I feel that if I went through an assault, right, that is, I don't want to tell anybody because I may be judged, right? So if I feel that people in my life are going to judge me based on how they have said things or how they've talked about sex, right, or sexual assault, I'm going to be less likely to share, right? So that's going to cause me to isolate myself because I'm going to feel like no one understands my pain. No one understands what I went through, the trauma that I've gone through, right? As well as this is a secret. And in some cases, right, that also is reiterated in families, right? That if it's incest or something like that, right, we keep it to ourselves. We're not going to tell people what happened, right? And a lot of times when that happens, we re traumatize these victims, or survivors, I should say. And so, and that's just working with like a general population, and then adding to like working with men who have gone through sexual trauma. There's a lot of other things that you have to kind of work through too, with cultural, for me, working within the systems of patriarchy, how that has really affected and shaped their views of what it means to be a man and have gone through sexual assault, whether that is from the hands of a woman, another male, young, or when they're at, the age where they could fight back. There's a lot that goes into that.
It sounds like what if we could like funnel it, down to this. It sounds like it's about reframing people's perception of sex in order for there to then be like, I guess, a behavioral change that happens with them. Is that, I mean, is
I
that
mean,
fair or?
yeah, no, that's totally fair. Like when we talk about sex, right? Everything that we absorb, right? Even pain, right? So a woman going through childbirth, right? And then having engaging in sex. although it takes like what 3 to 5 months for the vaginal muscles to heal completely, right? You
Mm.
may be completely turned off sex because now that is associated with pain, right? So
Mm.
when we associate pain, that's a real thing. That's credible evidence that something traumatic, something bad
Mm.
happened, not
Mm.
just mentally, right? But to your body.
Right.
So now your mind has said, hey, anything vaginal penetration has been pain. I no
Mm.
longer want to go through this. So now I'm turned off, right? And
Right.
that can cause a lot of anxiety. Again,
Mm.
I should be this. My partner wants this, right?
Mm.
Why can't I do this? And so recognizing that, yes, confronting shame, confronting the anxieties, misconceptions
Mhm.
that you have in the pressure of sex to help
Mhm.
change the behaviors to get you to a place where, hey, you're having pleasurable and
Right.
consensual sex, right?
Mm.
Because even if someone is consenting to sex and saying, yeah, I'm fine with this, right? They may not be mind wise there. They may not
Mm.
even want to have sex, right? They
Mm.
may not find it pleasurable. And I tell all my clients, all sex is good sex as long as it's pleasurable and consensual.
Okay. Okay, that's interesting. Um, how do you approach topics where it's like mismatched, sex drives, or like it's there's a difference there, right? And
Yeah.
so how do you address that? Um,
So when talking about like libidos and sex drive,
mm-hmm.
right? Because a libido is a
Yeah.
sex drive, right? Back then, it would be like, oh, let's try to schedule things, right? Does not
Mm-hmm.
work for all people. In fact, there is a great book by Emily Nagoski. I hope I'm saying her last name right, but it's called Come As You Are.
Okay.
And so in that book, she takes it as instead of looking at sexual desire as a libido front, where
Mm-hmm.
it's something that, like, oh my gosh, some people have this and that and whatever, she looks at it as brakes and accelerators, right?
Okay.
So the way she describes it is imagine being in a car, right? And you have two pedals. There's an accelerator and then there's a brake, right? And for some people, they may have more sensitive accelerators, right? So there's certain things that can be really turn ons, right?
Mm-hmm.
Accelerators are your turn on. So people who are more sensitive will be like, oh my gosh, it's easy for me to experience arousal this way,
Mm-hmm.
right? Compared to when we talk about breaks, right? Those are our turn offs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So those are things that, hey, I don't want this, right? Or would take me out of being aroused. So some people also have more sensitive brakes. Some people also have it where, in your car, you have
Mm-hmm.
like the handbrake, the
Mm-hmm.
emergency brake, right? That
Okay.
is super sensitive, right?
Okay.
So imagine that you're driving and the handbrake is on. You're probably not going to make it very far,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so when we're talking about that with couples, right? It's, hey, for your partner, right? Looking at a messy room could be really off putting because guess
Mm.
what? I'm no longer here. I'm thinking about all the things I need to clean, how I need to clean it. Are there people
Mm.
coming? What if the kids hear me? All these things. Now I'm in my head. I'm not in my body. I don't want this anymore. My brakes have been hit, right?
Mm.
So it can be something as, noticing that, hey, let me clean the room, let me make it more inviting. That can turn on the accelerator, right? That can be a turn on because now you're not thinking about all these things. Even in terms of just like, let's say your feet are cold and you're
Mhm.
thinking about your feet and you're just like,
Mhm.
I'm just so cold right now, right?
Okay.
Like,
Yeah.
put on some
All
socks,
right.
right? And so when we have people who have more sensitive accelerators, sensitive brakes, right? It's about working with them to figure out, hey, where can
Yeah.
we meet in the middle? What needs to change? Whether that's
Right.
environmental, is there mental things going on like anxiety, depression, maybe some for people with neurodivergency, right?
Mm.
Sensory
Mm.
issues. Because again, when we're talking about sex, it's not just the act of sex, your whole body is involved in it,
Mm.
right? So what you see, smell, hear, taste, touch, your beliefs, all those things are
Wow.
wrapped in having sex with somebody.
Right. So there's really a holistic approach behind sex therapy. I mean,
Yeah,
it's not just the act in itself, right? It's so
exactly.
much more to that. That's
Exactly.
that's super interesting.
Yeah, because
Wow.
a lot of times people think like, oh, what do you mean you're doing sex therapy? And it's like, no, actually, a lot goes into it. That's why people
Right.
have intimacy issues. And that's
Yeah.
not even talking about like miscommunication and everything like that when talking about like couples that make it harder, betrayals and trust, cheating that has happened
Mm.
that can impact sex in that way that we have to reestablish to help them.
For sure, for sure. What does a sex therapy session look like? Like, when the couple first comes into a therapy session.
Okay, so usually what sex therapy looks like is if a couple is coming in, let's say they've never even done like couples
Hmm.
counseling before.
Okay.
So I would do a normal, let's figure you out as a couple,
Okay.
right? Let's get together. What are
You
the
don't go straight
issues?
into sex.
I usually sometimes I warm them up. It depends. It
Okay.
depends on what they need. I feel
Okay.
people out. So usually I like to get a general whole consensus of where their relationship is, what's
Mm.
going on, because again, that also helps me
Hmm.
identify problems in having sex, right?
Okay.
So then I take a sexual history. So the sexual history could look like, what age did you watch pornography,
Mm.
right? When did you start being sexually intimate, whether that's with a partner
Mm.
or by yourself, right? What was your family's views on sex,
Hmm.
right, or intimacy? Is there any biological dysfunction? So are we having erectile dysfunction, right? So ED, things like that.
Mm.
Are we on any medications, right? People don't think about that. When you're on an
Mm.
antidepressant, that can affect your sex drive. So a lot of times, when talking about like men with depression, right?
Hmm.
Because that affects your sex drive or your desire. You can also ask your doctor to prescribe you Viagra to help with that, right?
Hmm.
For women, it's a little bit different because there isn't a magical pill for us
Hmm.
to take, right? So there's a bunch of things that go in childbirth, right? Did you recently go through childbirth? Have you cheated on one another?
Mm.
Have you ever cheated in the past, right? So all of those things help me get a better framework of what I need to work on to help sexual intimacy. And even if there's never been cheating, let's say you broke up and it was a really traumatic breakup, right? Somebody just was like, hey, I no longer want to be with you,
Hmm.
right? And then you guys come back as a couple. That's a betrayal.
Hmm.
We have to work on that
Mm.
because
Mm.
now we're talking about being vulnerable and having sex, right? How are you going to be vulnerable, right?
Hmm.
If and open yourself up if you feel like, hey, this person can just leave,
Mm.
right? Or
Mm.
maybe that's adding to the issues already that happened before that. So
Yeah.
all of those things help me understand where we need to take certain things or what I need to focus on to help.
What that will look like. Yeah.
Hmm.
How, a question that just, popped up to my mind is, how do you assess whether I have a healthy sex life? Like, how does, someone know? Because the topic is so taboo, right?
Hmm.
Like, I don't see necessarily people talking to each other. Hey, how'd it go this week?
Right?
How's sex going for you? Right? So
Which
like,
we should. I'm for
I
that.
don't know about
Ask
me
people
talking about
questions.
that here today. But I mean, how do you assess that? Like, how do I know that I have a healthy sex life, or that, I think that might be important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a healthy sex life, right, is dependent one on how you view it as an individual, but then how
Hmm.
you guys view it as a couple, right? Because if
Okay.
we're talking about different sex drives, right? If one person has a more sensitive accelerator, right? They might
Hmm.
be asking more for sex if their partner
Hmm.
has a more sensitive break, right? So the breaks are turnoffs. And
Hmm.
so in that way, if that person who has a sensitive or accelerator, right, is with someone who has a sensitive break, there could be a lot of miscommunication,
Hmm.
right? A lot of that person reaching out and being like, hey, can we have sex? Like initiating and then
Hmm.
facing rejection, right? So now we're being rejected on top of that,
Hmm.
right? And then for the person that is doing the rejection, it's like, I feel bad. I feel like I
Hmm.
should do this, right?
Okay.
And so if there's that sense of pressure, right, as well as maybe you've noticed that sex doesn't feel as good or something is off, right, that might be a sign to come into or figure out like, hey, do we
Okay.
need sex therapy, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't just also mean like sexual issues like that as well. It could also be like, and I've seen it, for people wanting to do polyamory or open the relationship up,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
That's another thing that I help couples
Mm.
deal with is, hey,
Mm.
are we individually and
Hmm.
as a couple strong enough to want to look outside of or open up the monogamous
I
relationship, and
see.
how do we do that in a safe way that respects autonomy
Mm-hmm.
for both people
Yeah.
to feel respected.
Mm.
So it definitely varies, but it definitely can be a lot of individualistic, like
Mm-hmm.
again, confronting a lot of your own issues as well as a couple, and how do we come together to, find that middle ground of this is what we need to do to have a stronger sex life.
Okay. Okay. That's interesting. Um, so, and what do the interventions look like in session? Like, what are some sex therapy interventions? What
Ooh,
is,
okay.
yeah.
That's a good
Yeah.
question. So, a lot of times with couples, I use somatic therapy.
Okay.
Um,
What's
so
somatic therapy?
so somatic therapy is basically, if I was to like bring it down, it's pretty much like mindfulness. So just like how we do in regular sessions when we're like, "Hey, bring yourself back to your body," right? It's the same thing or the same concept, but we're doing it with partners. So
Mm.
usually during this time, I tell couples, yeah, don't engage in sex,
Okay.
don't have any sexual contact, right?
Mm.
Because a lot of times, if we notice that there is performance issues, right, anxiety around performance, there's a lot of pressure, right?
Yeah.
Having someone still wanting to initiate sex takes, again, I'm out of it, I'm turned off by that, right?
Mm.
And so sit here and say, I know this is a really weird thing, but try not to engage in sex. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do massages, right? But we're going to
Okay.
do it with our clothes on, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we do clothes on massages. And in this time, you're going to really focus on the sensations that your partner is feeling. If they're telling you, add more
Mm-hmm.
pressure, take more pressure, this feels good,
Mm.
make it sensual, right? You could do that. It doesn't have to be clinical,
Yeah.
right? But we want to really focus on the person, the sensation, what we're feeling, the pressure, and all of that. And so I usually have couples do that for step one, because there's multiple steps, right?
Okay.
But that would usually be done for a week. And then when we talk
Do
about
we
it,
notice something happening when they, with the in step one that couple should be looking out for, or?
yeah. So one thing that you should be looking out for is if you notice any anxiety, if there's pain, right? And not just like, because again, if you
Mm-hmm.
have chronic conditions, right, or a disability, there might be things that like, hey, body wise, you're
Yeah.
noticing a lot more because you're focused on that,
Mm-hmm.
right? Focus on, you want to make sure that as the partner who is giving the massages, right, are we actually focusing, right? Are we respecting boundaries during
Mm-hmm.
this time, right? Of where they're telling us to apply pressure, where they're telling us not to touch, and things like that. I've definitely had it where working with couples, I did not explain it thoroughly at
Mm-hmm.
first. And so
Okay.
we had to kind of I had to
Take
take a step
a little.
back,
Okay.
provide resources and
Yeah.
materials,
All
and
right.
after that we like then went back into it, and
Mm-hmm.
then once we figured out and problem solved together, then couples were able to be like, oh, okay, this is exactly what we should be looking for.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just again one step. Now the goal is to sorry
Yeah.
the goal is to then
Mm-hmm.
get it to where we're having sensual sex, right?
Okay.
So it's not just, oh my gosh, let's tear out each other's clothes and all this stuff. No, it's not. It's not like
Mm-hmm.
that. It's more, okay, we've used the sensuality. We've
Okay.
focused on one another, our sensations, our body, we're connected to one another. So now
Mm-hmm.
we can actually, when we have sex, we're paying a lot more attention to what the other person's needs are, how they're
Okay.
responding. Because again, your body language communicates a lot.
So this is about tuning into your partner
And to
as well.
yourself,
Mm.
right? Because you also, in order to tell someone, you have to learn to speak up, right? To know what feels good, when to say it feels good or when it doesn't feel good, right? Because a lot of times when we feel pressure to just give in or to consent, but we're not really
Mm-hmm.
consenting, we don't want to disappoint our partner, right? We don't want to
Gotcha.
make them feel bad. So then we don't speak up,
Mm.
right? And
Mm.
so in that way, now we're not paying attention to our body and the feelings that are coming through having sex, right? And
Okay.
so now it's not pleasurable, right? And I have definitely told clients or had conversation with clients, and I've said it in a very compassionate,
Mm-hmm.
empathetic way, but I was, as I'm listening to them, and I've been like, hey, that doesn't sound pleasurable. That doesn't sound like good sex.
Mm.
And that has made a lot of my clients think, and they're like, you know what? You're right. It wasn't good. I didn't enjoy it, right? And it wasn't like a meh, because we have
So how
meh.
do you pick that up? Like I guess that's maybe more of a clinical question, right? That I'm asking, because when working with couples, I'm just curious, like, how do you pick up and say, like that doesn't sound, like
Mhm.
it's like
Yeah.
that's good sex. That doesn't sound healthy.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of like, again, I'm listening. I'm also looking at their
Hmm.
body language. So
Okay.
whether it's with couples or individuals, like
Yeah.
I've had clients who was just a client describing to me um, a moment where they were having sex with someone and the way that, and they were talking about it,
Hmm.
it's kind of like the sense of shame that comes
Okay.
in, that sense
Hmm.
of I didn't really want to participate. Like you could just tell
Hmm.
with the way that they hold themselves. And that's when
Okay.
listening to the context and how a lot of times too they try to make it sound like it was good,
Yeah.
right? And so I kind of start with like it doesn't sound pleasurable. Now again, like I was saying before, there's times where we have meh.
Right.
It's not bad, it's not good, but like
Yeah.
hey, we're
Yeah,
here.
it's good enough.
Yeah, it's good
It's good
enough. We're
enough.
here, team effort.
Right.
Is because again, right? Sex is not always going to be.
Right.
We love it if it is, right? But it's never. It's
Hmm.
not never. I shouldn't say that. But it may never always be that mind blowing orgasmic feeling, right? There might be
Right.
times where it's just meh.
Meh.
Yeah, meh.
Meh.
But the bad sex, right?
Yeah.
The bad sex where it's like this is not pleasurable.
Right.
I'm blaming myself. I have a lot of guilt.
So let me ask you. So okay. So that brings me to this other thought that if
Hmm.
I'm dealing with a couple,
Yeah.
right, and there's just a mismatch. Like one of them, has certain fetishes, and
Hmm.
the other one just does not, right? And it's not willing to engage at all. Where for them, like this type of sex is, I'm not comfortable. I don't want to do this. While for him, this is the accelerator,
Yeah.
right? Like this is it. So how how do we work with that?
So actually, there's a lot of different ways you can kind of work with that because let's say for that couple, right?
Hmm.
I like to sit here and say, what are our red lights, yellow lights, and green lights, right?
Okay.
And what I mean by that is reds are our hard nose, right?
Hmm.
Yellows are, hey, we're curious, but like not entirely too sure.
Yeah.
Greens is like, let's go, bro,
Right.
let's
Right.
do this,
Gotcha.
right?
Yeah.
So, in finding that,
Hmm.
right, I usually sit here and say, because a lot of times we can have a sexual fantasy, right?
Hmm.
Does not actually mean we want that in real life, right?
Okay.
We
Okay.
can be like, yeah, this is a great thing. Nor in practice, this is not it.
Okay.
Not it. So, for instance,
Hmm.
you can have someone who's like, maybe watches pornography, right? And is
Hmm.
into choking and is like, oh my gosh, that seems fun. I like that,
Yeah.
right? It's just like the face you made, the grimace,
Yeah.
right?
No
Like,
judgment. No
yeah,
judgment.
no judgment. No one is judging
Therapist
here. This
space.
is a,
Therapist space.
yes, this is
Yes.
a safe space,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
there are certain things that, like, again, may not sound pleasing. Now, that also can be
Right.
dependent on how much education do we have around that. Because if we're talking about kinks and
Hmm.
fetishes, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people see things from pornography or
Okay.
media or books, right? And
And
they're
I'm not
like,
trying to throw you off,
yeah,
like to deviate the conversation,
yeah.
and kind of stay, but and maybe this is for another time for us to
Hmm.
talk, like how our fetishes and kinks like developed,
Oh my
and I
gosh.
don't know, and I don't want to throw you, I don't just, yeah, continue,
Yeah,
but that's something I
we
think
could
is important
definitely,
too.
yeah, no, because fetishes and kinks definitely, especially when we talk about kinks and
Hmm.
fetishes, and I will turn it back to the other direction.
Yeah, yeah.
But kinks are things that we're like, hey, this is great, but I don't need it to have sex, right? It doesn't
Okay.
have to be involved in the process of sex. It's just something that I would like, right? So
Hmm.
again, you can have someone who has a choking kink and just be like, hey, this is nice, but it doesn't have to be there
Yeah,
all the time. It doesn't even have to be
just
there at all.
choke me once a month
Yeah,
kind of
once
thing,
a month. Let's pencil it in. Let's schedule a choking session, right? Maybe you're like,
Okay.
hey, I want
Yeah.
hot wax dribbled on me. And you're
Okay.
just like, but can we do
Gotcha.
that every 1 to 2 months?
Right.
Cool, right?
Right.
Fetishes is like, no, I need this. this is a part of my sexual experience, right? I need this
Okay.
to actually achieve an orgasm, right?
Interesting.
So that
Okay.
is where kinks and fetishes differ, right? A
Wow.
fetish is,
Okay.
it actually has to be a part. So if someone has a tickling fetish, right? They
That's a
need to
thing?
be, yeah, that is a thing. Tickling fetish is a thing.
Okay.
It is a thing.
All right.
So there are some people, because again, if you think about it, right? If you
Yeah.
think about tickling, in the certain context, in the right
Mm-hmm.
context, when, hey, I love my partner, everything's great, it's an accelerator, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
it is good. It feels really good to be tickled, right?
Okay.
Um, again, in a different context, like if I'm fighting with my partner, right? Don't tickle me.
Mm-hmm.
Why are you touching me? I
Right.
want to fight you and you're
Right.
trying to tickle me. I'm going to
Right.
punch you in the throat right now.
Gotcha.
What are you talking about?
Right. Right.
Right? But in that moment where it's like, hey, right, because of the way that pleasure
Mm-hmm.
is and that
Mm-hmm.
feeling like a really good
Mm-hmm.
sensation, and this would get into the whole conversation of, again, right? How do we get from a kink and a fetish? How does that develop, right?
Yeah.
Which there's a lot of science, neuroscience behind it,
Yeah.
right? But essentially, if that person who has a tickling fetish is not having that in sex, it's like, ooh, this is how I'm not going to be able to receive an orgasm. There has to be something.
How do you handle that where the partner is not necessarily willing, right?
Mm,
And you're mentioning red light, yellow light, green light.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so going back to that, thank you for the reminder. Definitely then being like, and there's actually, oh my gosh, I would have to break out my phone, but there's a quiz you could take with your partner
Oh.
and you could see what are your hard no's, what are things that you might be
Mm-hmm.
interested, which is our yellows and greens that are like, go, 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 we're cool with this, right?
Right.
If we have things that are a red, a no, hey,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to leave that alone, right? That's not
Gotcha.
something that, like, at this point in time, is something that would be consensual, right? They would be
Mm-hmm.
doing that for you, for your pleasure. And again, as I said, all
Mm-hmm.
sex is good sex as long as it's pleasurable and consensual,
Right.
right?
Right. How do couples have these types of conversations outside of maybe the sex therapy, you know,
Yeah. So
session? Yeah.
when talking about sex, right? I
Yeah.
always, especially, it's really important that you guys have that solid foundation of a healthy relationship,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's just within anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because talking about sex requires being vulnerable,
Right.
right? And vulnerability looks like communication, right? It looks like safety. It looks like
Mm-hmm.
having trust. So if you guys don't feel
Absolutely.
safe with one another, you don't trust one another, or let's say you don't feel safe and you don't trust yourself, right? Enough
Mm-hmm.
to want to be vulnerable, right? That's when, again, shame comes in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it feels like, oh, this is something bad, something we shouldn't
Right.
talk about. This is,
Right.
what if she thinks I'm weird? What if she leaves me, right?
Mm,
Because maybe
mm,
I find other women attractive or other men attractive, but like
mhm,
obviously I choose to be with my partner. But what if
mm,
they find that to be a problem?
right.
What if I'm interested in, threesomes or other people and
Yeah.
things like that? But
Because I can imagine that creates a lot of insecurity in the other partner as
mhm,
well too, right? Like, okay, whoa, like this is what he likes, and this isn't what I'm willing to give him or her, right? And
yeah.
so, that's where I guess how we help couples to deal with that where there's such differences
Yeah,
like
and
that.
communicating that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's okay if that is something that you're not comfortable doing,
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
That means, hey, what are other ways, right? Whether that's, hey, if you feel uncomfortable with ever having threesomes, that's cool, right?
Mm-hmm.
Might be, what if we watch pornography together where they do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or what would this look like as this being your own thing for you to do, whether that is watching adult material or doing
Mm-hmm.
whatever, that's your own business, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't take away from the fact that you choose and want to be with your partner,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different things that go into having open and honest conversations about the topics of sex, but you also have to know what you like, right?
Mm-hmm.
How you're especially for a lot of girls, you don't really get a chance to talk about your anatomy. Like, you have a few anatomy classes, but it's like, shoo,
Mm.
right? So you don't really know. A lot of people, a lot of women come into me and it's like, I don't even
Yeah.
know what feels good to me, right?
Mm.
And so that's when I'm like, let's take a step back, right?
Yeah.
Because we got to figure out before we could communicate to our partner, or even while we're figuring it out, right? How can we communicate this, involve our partner, right? But we need to figure out what turns you on, what makes you
Mm-hmm.
feel good,
Mm-hmm.
right? What sensations, and that might require having to not only look at the anatomy, right? But understanding how your anatomy works, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because people don't really even realize how the clitoris works,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And the pleasures there, and how a lot of times, like, misconceptions about, like, oh, people, like, penis length is so important, and it's like, yeah, but not really. It's the girth, because, like, the way the clitoris,
You hear that, boys?
yes, the
Size don't matter.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. It's
Mm-hmm.
about all the other stuff, the
Yeah.
foreplay, right? Are we
Right.
rushing into that,
Yeah.
right? Because again, if we're rushing into it, more than likely it's not going to lead to pleasurable sex.
Gotcha.
So recognizing that girth, because it does rub against the other sides of the clitoris, because I wish I had, like, my little thing to show
Mm-hmm.
you guys. But it's not just the hood, it is an attachment. So it's a long thing like that. And then what you see is the clitoris and the hood there. But so when you're rubbing against it, there's pressure there that you can put. So
Mm-hmm.
girth actually matters a lot more than necessarily the length. And also, too, when we talk about it, a lot of women don't actually orgasm from vaginal penetration. They orgasm through other means. So that's another misconception, is like penetrative sex is like good sex,
Mm.
right? Because I've also had a lot of men being like, I'm not a man if I can't make a girl orgasm through penetrative sex. And I'm just like, actually, that's
Mm-hmm.
not how that works. You
Mm.
could still be great at sex, but, like,
Yeah.
penetrative sex is not all that there is to having sex. In fact, you're limiting yourself and your partner to a world of sexual experiences because of that worldview that you
Wow.
have that's
Wow.
been shaped by our culture and society.
Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of information, and it seems like it's a lot of educating, your clients as you do this work. So,
Hmm.
I want to. I know we're coming kind of close to the end, um, and I just feel like I want to touch on the just trauma just
Yeah,
very briefly.
absolutely.
But how do you help clients navigate past traumas, right, or negative sexual experiences? What does that maybe look like?
So, helping clients work through trauma is something that I hold dear to me, because I always remind my clients that my office is your safe space.
Mm-hmm.
You choose when or how you want to share your story. You are in a position of power and control in this office, right? I also tell them that, like, hey, if I notice that we're going too far, or I feel like I'm pushing you too hard, let's take a step back. Because working with that, there's a great book, forget the author's name, but it's called Reclaiming Pleasure, and it
Okay.
talks about people who have gone through sexual assault.
Mm.
And in that book, and I took the seminar with her, watched the seminar that she gave, right? But talking about it again, multifaceted, because you got robbed of power and control. You got robbed of being able to consent, right? And so when that has happened to you, how you look at sex has changed, right? What feels good may no longer feel good to you, right? How you survive that moment may cause a lot of shame and blame and guilt, right? That needs to be unpacked. And so with a lot of clients, it's one, doing a lot of mindfulness work with them, to bring them back to their body. It's also recognizing that you are no longer the person that was in that position of feeling powerless and helpless. You are someone who can make choices, right? You have control over yourself. You
Absolutely.
control who you wish to be intimate with, right? And redefining sex
Yeah,
for
regaining
them.
that power back.
Yeah. And so I do a lot of that. I also do body scans, but a little bit different than our traditional body scans that we do. So normally when we do a body scan, it's, meditation, breathe in, breathe out, check in, going from your feet all the way up to your head. And I do that with my clients. But then I ask them, what is your body trying to tell you in this moment? And then I ask them again, what is your body trying to tell you in this moment?
Mm.
And then I ask them one more time, what is your body trying to tell you in this moment? And then I sit here and I say, my body is telling me, and they say, tired, stressed, anxious, depressed.
Yeah.
Where do you feel that in your body? right? Because a lot of times when we talk about trauma, we're reacting, right? We're not really responding. We are going into a place of fear. We are going into a place of, I need to survive the most traumatic moment. And especially when talking about trauma too, it's not just the big catastrophic moments that we endure, right, with sexual assault or any type of assault that happens, right? It is also the everyday traumas, our type 2 or little t traumas, right? The messages that we get, that we pick up and that we absorb, that tell us that, hey, you're no longer safe, I'm not safe, right? And those are the relational traumas that we have with people. So if I'm fighting with my partner and they leave the room, right? Although I know I'm physically safe, right? I'm not emotionally safe because maybe when I went through an assault, right, and I told my parents as a little kid, this person so and so did something to me, my parents didn't engage with me, right? They didn't help me. They were like, "Don't talk about it.
Yeah.
We're not." That's something for you to deal with, right? And they may not say it like that,
sure.
right? But we're not engaging. And so that comes with feelings of being rejected, right? Feeling abandoned. So even though that situation happened then and you're fighting with your partner, they leave the room, right? That can trigger a whole bunch of moments where you have felt abandoned and rejected. And now you look at your partner and you're feeling that same way.
Absolutely.
And so it's really important to help separate
Yeah.
those things.
There's so much here that we can continue to unpack, and we definitely need like a part 2, part 3,
Yes.
as well too, more. But last question is like, what advice would you give someone who's, thinking about seeking sex therapy for the first time?
I would sit here and say the advice that I give is give it a chance. It is going to be awkward, right? It's going to be uncomfortable, right? But at the end of the day, even though it is uncomfortable and it's going to be awkward, at least with me, I also try to make it fun because sex can be fun. Talking about sex can be fun. It can be engaging, right? But there has to be that willingness, right, to talk about the things that are uncomfortable, to
Absolutely.
look at those things and be like, hey, I know that at the end of the day, this is going to help me, right? So just be willing. We're going to have fun. It's going to be great times, but it's also going to be a lot of hard work, facing uncomfortability too.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Fallon, for just sharing your insight, your knowledge,
Yay.
and definitely, I hope we can do this again.
I
This
hope
is
so
great
too.
information. So,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you for having me here. I really appreciate it. This was fun.
Yes, it was fun. It was good.